Capes on the Couch podcast is for entertainment purposes only. Dr. Issues is a psychiatrist, but he is not your psychiatrist and does not have knowledge of your individual situation. For any personal mental health concerns, please consult your own healthcare providers. For medical emergencies, please call 911 or the designated number in your area immediately. Remember that you are not alone and help is out there.
Hello and welcome to Capes on the Couch, where comics need counseling. I'm your host, Anthony Sitko, and alongside me, as always, my good friend, Dr. Issues.
Wow, this is probably going to be an incredibly long run for such a mediocre character.
Wow, you're just right off the bat, you're starting with this. This week's episode is centered around Moon Knight. Before we get started, as always, you can catch us at capesonthecouch.live. We're distributed through the Libsyn network. You can find us on Google Play, SoundCloud, iTunes, Stitcher, and TuneIn. As I said, we are doing this issue. Issue number 4 is about Moon Knight, who happens to be one of my favorite all-time comic book characters. And I understand he's a C-lister, okay? I get it, Doc. I absolutely understand that, and I think that's why I love him so much.
Okay, you definitely have to expound on that. I'm genuinely interested in your take on this. Okay,
listen. You've known me for a long time. You know I really enjoy rooting for underdogs. There's just something about them that just compels me to give them a voice and to give them some support. And I'll be perfectly honest, this goes back probably close to 10 years. It was right around the time of Iron Man 2, and I had read a report that this is just goes to show you how my mind operates. Marvel Studios was looking to sort of draft writers in to create screenplays for some of their lower tiered characters. And I was looking around and I said, who's a lower tier character that I think would make for a fascinating story? And I happened across Moon Knight, and I began reading. This is actually no joke. This is how it began. I began reading his run. I thought issue number 1 of his first self-titled series from 1980 was a fantastic self-enclosed origin story told in 22 pages, beautifully drawn by Bill Sienkiewicz and written by Doug Menck. And I thought it was amazing. And I thought it was capable of being expanded because, frankly, the notion that he just gets resurrected and he's like, oh, I'm going to be Moon Knight. And then I'm going to create these additional identities of Stephen Grant and Jake Lockley. And everybody just sort of accepts it because that's the way it was in 1980. I think if he were done now, you have to give some credence to that. But in any event, I really began investigating the character and doing a lot more reading. And there's just something about him. I think it's because he is bat guano crazy. And I really like where he is. And the fact that in spite of so many flaws, so many flaws, he still tries to do the right thing, even if it's a slightly warped and twisted version of the right thing. And I feel like that's just something that we don't see in a lot of characters. A lot of characters are really, really nuts. And that's kind of why we have this show, is to talk about all of the various issues. But that's really what made me fall in love with the character, if I can be perfectly frank. So I guess there's your answer.
Okay, well, I can certainly see that you've invested the time. So please regale us. Tell us the long and storied history of Moon Knight.
Certainly. So Moon Knight was created in 1975 by Parlin and Sienkiewicz Parlin and Menck as a villain to Werewolf by Night, Jack Russell. And the character was just really supposed to appear in just those 2 issues, and of which I have his debut issue. It's not a terribly high CGC quality, but my now wife got it for me as a Christmas gift 2 years ago, 1975. I have it. It's probably like a 3.5 quality issue. Anyway, he was created dressed in all silver as a way to combat the werewolf. He was doing the bidding of the committee, which is a group of men that were trying to capture Jack Russell for reasons I honestly can't remember at this point. And there was just something about the character, and he made an appearance later on in the Werewolf by Night run. Then he began making some appearances in Marvel Spotlight and Marvel 2-in-1, and then he had sort of a recurring feature as a backup story in the Hulk magazine, which was largely focused on, naturally, the Hulk and also the Hulk TV show. But there were some comics in there as well, and that sort of gave rise to the background of who Marc Spector / Moon Knight was. He was a boxer, son of a rabbi. Then he joined the Marines. Then he was kicked out because he punched a superior officer. Then he became a mercenary. And it was there that he was in the desert on an archaeological dig. And he was doing the bidding of a warlord named Raoul Bushman, who they came across this dig and they killed Dr. Peter Al-Rayoun. Bushman was the one who killed Dr. Al-Rayoun. And Mark said, that's it. I've had enough. You've been a little too violent. He squares off with Bushman. Bushman beats 7 shades of him and leaves him to die in the desert. Well, he ends up getting resurrected, depending on which version of the continuity. He's brought to the temple or he just gets resurrected there in the sand. He gets resurrected by the Egyptian god of vengeance, Khonshu, is asked to become his avatar, his Moon Knight of Justice. And so he returns to the U.S. Not only now he's Marc Spector, but he creates 2 identities. In addition to Moon Knight, he creates 2 identities. This millionaire known as Stephen Grant, because apparently he used all the money that he had accumulated from his years as a mercenary, and he creates this millionaire identity of Stephen Grant. And he also becomes a cab driver known as Jake Lockley. So now he's Marc Spector, Moon Knight, Stephen Grant, and Jake Lockley. Please try to follow because it gets a little hairy here. The 4 of these different identities all exist within the body of this one man who somehow finds no time to sleep. He's dating Marlene Al-Rayoun, the daughter of Peter Al-Rayoun, who was murdered in the desert. His pilot is a man by the name of Jean-Paul Duchamp, also known as Frenchie. He also befriends a diner owner in New York by the name of Gina. She has 2 sons, Ricky and Ray. When Khonshu gives him his powers and resurrects him, he gains these powers that become stronger as the moon gets brighter and as the different phases of the moon. So he's at his weakest during a new moon and he's at his strongest during a full moon. So he battles a whole bunch of guys. Then he loses his moon-based powers, and then he joins the West Coast Avengers with Hawkeye and Tigra, etc. He actually dates Tigra for a while. Then he battles his brother Randall, who's known as Shadow Knight, who claims that he should be the one who's really Khonshu's avatar. Then this is where we get into the late 80s, and frankly, I've read all of these issues, but they're so 90s, and I use that as a pejorative term, and those comic book fans who have read comics from the early to mid 90s, you know what I'm talking about. There's just something so inherently 90s about this run of Marc Spector Moon Knight. That's the comic issue. He dies after his building explodes because there's a computerized program called 0 Hour created by Seth that he just decides he's just going to blow the whole building up and sacrifice himself in it. In order to prevent it from infecting other people and causing more damage. But he gets resurrected by Khonshu yet again. And then there's 2 small miniseries in there. And then we get to 2006, and this is my favorite 6 issues of Moon Knight. I should say one of my favorite runs. It's my favorite trade paperback. It's called The Bottom. David Finch does the artwork, and Charlie Huston, who is a crime novel writer, wrote it. It is 6 issues of perfection. It is the comeback of Marc Spector, both literally and figuratively, within the Marvel Universe and within comics in general. Mark has been left and abandoned by himself. He has no one except for his butler and maid. And Marlene has left him. He doesn't have any powers anymore. He's basically half crippled in a wheelchair. He's relying on painkillers just to slog through the day. And he comes back. And the profile who has the ability to look at you and see all of your weaknesses and strengths, et cetera, et cetera. He's hired by the new committee to find Moon Knight, and Taskmaster gets hired to fight him. And long story short, because I could talk for an embarrassingly long period of time about this run, Moon Knight returns bigger, stronger, badder than ever. And then he doesn't take a side in Civil War because neither side really wants Moon Knight because he's that crazy. And he doesn't take a side in Civil War. Instead, he heads to Mexico and he fights luchadors. And I wish I were making that up. And I swear to God, I'm not. He fights luchadors. It's not one of the better runs, honestly. No offense. Mark Teixeira does some great artwork there, but it's not, to me, as a longtime Moon Knight fan, it's not a very compelling story. Then he gets The Vengeance of Moon Knight, and that's a kind of a cool story because he returns to New York. He's trying to be a real hero, and now he's got a no-kill policy because previously Moon Knight was never one of those guys that would shy away from killing you. He would kill you if he thought it would, ultimately save lives in the long run. He didn't have any of those no-kill compunctions, but now he's returned. to New York City, but he's not going to kill anybody. And now he begins seeing Khonshu as this little bug thing that kind of floats around him. He's either a bug or he's a little person with the skull of a bird, because Khonshu, as the Egyptian god, had the head of a bird. I don't remember what kind of bird. I want to say an ibis maybe. But in any event, the skull over the body appears to Moon Knight and constantly harangues and harasses him and says, you know, you need to kill, you need to do a better job. You're not being my avatar. You're doing a pretty crappy job of it. So then moving forward, then we get into the Brian Michael Bendis run with the artwork by Alex Maleev. And here is where things get a little interesting, because instead of Moon Knight and Mark having the various personalities of Stephen Grant and Jake Lockley, now Mark has the personalities of Spider-Man, Wolverine, and Captain America. What I never understood about the run was why I should care about Moon Knight when Moon Knight doesn't want to be Moon Knight. But in any event, so he goes into battle and he has the claws of Wolverine, and he's got a web shooter, and he's got a little energy shield, and Echo, who's another low rate Avenger, they sort of have like a little bit of a thing, and they end up finding an Ultron head, of all things, and they end up battling Count Nefaria, who's an Avengers level villain, but somehow Moon Knight beats him on his own. And then we get into the Warren Ellis run with art by Declan Shalvey, who kind of redesigned the costume a little bit. And I loved this run. This is an amazing run because Warren Ellis is an amazing writer, and it's 6 very different sort of loosely connected stories. Declan Shalvey, as I said, redesigned the costume so it's no longer all white. It's kind of like a black underneath with some white accents. And interestingly enough, my first ever cosplay that I did was as this version of Moon Knight. And I went to New York Comic Con and I walked up to Declan Shalvey, and he was absolutely blown away because I was his version of Moon Knight. And he was like, oh my God, it's so amazing. Can I please take a picture with you? He's the nicest guy. Shout out to Declan. Follow him on Twitter. He's an incredible artist. And every time I see him now, he's like, you're that guy that dressed as my Moon Knight. And he swear to God, he remembers me. I did that 3 years ago. And every time I met him since then, he still remembers me.
Right now, all I can think is we have either doubled our listeners or cut them in half. I have no idea what's going to happen from this point forward. My God, you put the word cosplay in and, you know, we're now off the rails, people. Okay, keep going.
So that's the Ellis run. And then we move forward a little bit, and then we move into the Jeff Lemire run. I know I'm skipping the Greg Smallwood run, and I apologize for that, but I'm trying to keep this to an hour. The Jeff Lemire run, it was absolutely amazing from a writing standpoint because it took everything about the 30 plus year history of the character and brought it all together. And he's grappling with the impact that his identities are having on him. And he's really sort of having this internal struggle with all of these things where, depending on which personality is taking over at any one point, the art literally changes because there were a number of different artists on the run. Francesco Francavilla is one of them, and he was, if I recall correctly, he was handling the Jake Lockley personality. And at the end of it, Mark sort of comes to terms and he reconciles all of the various personalities that he has. And he understands that Khonshu is really the one who's been poisoning his brain, and that Khonshu is the real enemy of all of this. And he battles Khonshu and he defeats him, and he comes to term with all the personalities and identities and understands that they are not the problem. And so that run ended a couple of months ago. And now we're in the run written by Max Bemis from the band Say Anything. And Max Bemis legitimately has bipolar disorder. He has written a couple of comics before, and I guess he feels that because he's written comics and he has a legitimate mental health disorder, that this would make him an effective writer for Moon Knight. Except, if I can be perfectly frank, I am not a fan of this run at all. I feel like it does a disservice to everything that the character had literally just gone through. And now all of a sudden he's grappling with all of the personalities again, where each of them are... when he's in one of them, the others are in sort of like this fugue state where they don't know what the other is doing. And apparently now he has a daughter with Marlene, but only Jake had the daughter. Or is it Stephen? I don't really remember, because not a thing in this run makes sense. And as a longtime fan of the character, I just feel that this entire run kind of spits in the face of everything that Jeff Lemire did. And I feel it does a disservice to everything that's prior. And I'm sure Max Bemis is a wonderful person personally. I don't know anything about Say Anything, the band. It's I think it's like a punk type thing. It's not really my shtick, but I don't like him as the writer on this run. And I feel like we need to get somebody else in there who maybe understands that just because you have a mental disorder doesn't mean you can write about having a mental disorder. So that's kind of where we are. I mean, we're literally in the middle of this run. He's battling an avatar of Ra, the Sun King, and this person who calls himself the Truth, who literally makes you incapable of speaking lies, and you'll just blurt out whatever is on your mind. No filter, whatever you're legitimately thinking. It's an interesting concept. I just wish it were written better. And that's kind of where we are with the character. And that's been my long-winded summary of Moon Knight over the past, 35 plus years of the character. And I apologize, Doc, for rambling, but honestly, I could have gone even more in depth.
Okay. Well, the good news is that means you've given plenty to work with. Oh, boy. All right. Once again, and I don't do this for every episode, I'm just going to lead off with something here, specifically a diagnosis. And if you've listened to previous episodes, I said anybody that just brings this up out of nowhere, I will kind of look at you funny because I've never encountered this in my career. But it is an official diagnosis, and therefore I'm going to give it the treatment that it deserves, okay? Dissociative identity disorder. Disruption of identity characterized by two or more distinct personality states, described in some cultures as an experience of possession. Disruption in identity involves marked discontinuity in a sense of self and sense of agency, alterations in affect. Affect refers to basically how you're showing your emotions, in other words, what people see about how you're feeling. Behavior, consciousness, memory, perception, cognition, and or sensory motor function. These signs and symptoms may be observed by others or reported by the individual. Recurrent gaps in recall of everyday events. The disturbance is not a normal part of a broadly accepted cultural or religious practice. I bring that part up especially because you can't just say, hey, there was an Egyptian god that was kind of like that, so I guess that kind of matches it. Well, especially with that summary, no, it clearly doesn't. Symptoms cause clinically significant distress or impairment in social, occupational, or other important areas of functioning. And I like this caveat. In children, the symptoms are not better explained by imaginary playmates or other fantasy play. The only reason I bring that up is because, especially with this guy's traumatic background, I somehow don't think that in the synagogue with his rabbi father, there was a little Moon Knight, Marc Spector, like going around with all these other characters built from the start. Or at least I don't think so in any of the indication, unless you have some other information to say otherwise.
Not Moon Knight specifically, but in the Jeff Lemire run, Jake Lockley appeared to him as an imaginary friend.
Huh. And this is why this man has an encyclopedic knowledge of Moon Knight, ladies and gentlemen.
And it's also interesting because as I mentioned earlier, I was looking into the character to write and or propose a film to Marvel Studios about this. And as a result of all of my research, I had concocted a backstory, and I wanted to give it some gravitas and some depth so that it would fit within the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Because, as I said, when this character was written in 1975 and then later got his own solo run in 1980, it became, and he's resurrected, and he just comes up with these alternative identities, and we're just good with that. I felt like that wasn't enough realism for the character, so I gave him a backstory in which he had an imaginary friend named Jake who helped him deal with the fact that he had an abusive father, et cetera, et cetera. So many things from the Jeff Lemire run were part of my screenplay, but he did them so much better than I did. So I can't even get mad. And at one point, a couple of times when reading the run, I would literally have to put the book down because I would get angry over the fact that he had my ideas from the screenplay that I had written back in, like, no exaggeration, back in like 2010, 2011. But he did them so much better than I did that I just got angry about it. I was like, damn, this is better than I wrote. It was my idea, but he did it better. But Jake being an imaginary friend during his youth is something that was touched on. And he went to therapy for it as a child, and they tried to address it. Neither his father nor the therapist could remove the concept of Jake from him as a child. But like I said, that was really only touched on in the Jeff Lemire run. But dissociative identity disorder is the primary, I guess, identifying trait for Moon Knight's psychoses, or at least that's, you start with that one and then everything else just sort of falls out as a result of that.
Yeah, basically. And it's interesting because the main thing that we see with this, at least from what I remember reading, is that the relationships that he builds, many of them are so uniquely focused on one of those identities compared to someone like Marlene that gets to see all of them. I think it's fascinating because you already mentioned it. He creates someone like Jake. He's an everyman, he's a cab driver. He's going to be there with, people at, just doing their regular thing and probably seeing some of the underside of, what's going on in the world. Because if anybody's ever heard of the show Taxi Cab Confessions, you learn a lot when you're driving a taxi cab. Actually, at this point, it's a trope in and of itself. He creates the millionaire personality, Stephen Grant. I mean, I'm hesitant to say creates, because that implies that there is an active part of this that the person is fully under control. Most of this is a lack of control. These things are happening on their own. Without knowledge of the true individual that we're talking about. But to get back to the point, with someone like Stephen Grant, he's going to see the upper crust. He's going to see high society. He's going to see the elite. He's going to be in that world. In a sense, with the exception of Marc Spector himself, ne'er the twain shall meet. I mean, it's gonna, he's going to see all of society just from completely different views, and they're not all really going to be connected. I'm not exactly sure how I would view that. I don't think anybody sees the world that way. So this is something I'll admit. I'm kind of going from academic literature as opposed to personal experience dealing with this in terms of seeing a patient with it.
Yeah, and to your point, I know that when he goes to the diner to interact with Gina and her sons, that they know him as Jake, whereas Marlene kind of prefers the Stephen personality because he's the wealthy one. And depending on the run, Mark never really shows up. It's a situation where he's Stephen, Jake, or Moon Knight. Marc Spector is quote unquote dead, even though he was the original personality. He is who he authentically is. The Mark personality doesn't often arise unless needed. Now, in the current run, Jake is the violent one, who's willing to go further and do things that the other personalities are not. But in prior incarnations of that's been Mark's sort of aspect to his personality. Because again, each of the personalities, again, quote unquote, bring something different to the table. Stephen is the millionaire. Jake is the cabbie. Mark is the scrapper, the violent one. He's the fighter. And depending on what kind of story you want to tell, that's the impact and the focus that the personality will have, and that personality will come forward. And when Warren Ellis took over, you actually kind of added a fourth one, and that was Mr. Knight, who dressed in the all white suit with the white hood covering his face. And he was just more of like a straightforward business oriented guy who was willing to kick the crap out of you if you stopped him from doing what he needed to do. That issue, I think it was number 5, was basically his take on The Raid by Gareth Edwards. And Moon Knight just basically fights his way through all of the floors of an apartment building to rescue this girl that was kidnapped and being held there by gang members, one of whom looked like Morris Day from the time. He's very colorful, outlandish.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, no, seriously, I'm pretty sure Declan Shalvey said he wanted to draw him as like a Morris Day Prince, colorful, over the top 80s. I mean, the character really doesn't fit with everybody else in the building, but it kind of works. It's just such an offbeat thing. But as I said, the dissociative identity is thing number 1 when you talk about Moon Knight. Aspect number 2 is this religious association and Khonshu. And in prior runs, I guess before the last 7-8 years, Khonshu was just sort of there. He was discussed. He was known to be the source of Mark's powers to the extent that Mark had them, and we'll touch on that in a little bit. But Khonshu didn't really have an active role in the stories until, I guess, the Houston run. And then during the Vengeance of Moon Knight, where Khonshu began popping up almost as an imaginary figure and talking to Moon Knight, taunting him. And then it really took over when Warren Ellis took over the book, and he's been utilized more and more recently, where Khonshu wants to push Moon Knight into being the hero or character, so to speak, that Khonshu wants him to be, who is more violent, more outgoing, because Khonshu says, I need people to believe in me. That's what gives me my strength. And you are my avatar. You are literally me on Earth. You need to do what I would do. And that internal struggle marks a lot of what the stories over the last, again, 7 or 8 years have been. That struggle between Marc trying to be the version of Moon Knight that he wants to be, and Khonshu saying, no, I need you to do it this way. So that's something that I think is interesting and unique to Moon Knight as a character. I don't know what impact that kind of has on a psychological aspect, but Doc, if you want to take a crack at it.
So you're telling me basically that he needed to start making WWKD stickers. What would Khonshu do instead of WWJD?
I guess if you want to go that way. Well, sure. Now I'm giving you the side eye.
Yeah. The reason why I said it that way, it wasn't meant to belittle anyone that actually follows that. What I do have a point to this. Tenets, meaning spiritual guidelines. It doesn't have to be organized religion, but it can be, and usually is something that's important for society as a whole. It creates the moral base that we all work from. I shouldn't say we all, obviously everyone's different, but many, many, many people, and it's the overwhelming majority, work with a spiritual base that creates, the moral framework that we use. So the fact that they include that in the comics is, I think that's appropriate. How is someone that doesn't appear to be properly integrated as a human being, how are they going to interpret that? Then that might be a problem, because that means that they're literally going to have multiple interpretations, if they even care. There are plenty of opportunities for Moon Knight to do, his own thing, regardless of what someone else says. But the idea of control, in other words, obviously we're talking about comics here, so just like, hey man, I own you. In other words, you got nothing without me. That's that's something that is gonna push anybody to do what that person's bidding is. And
Khonshu is certainly not shy at all about reminding Marc, I have brought you back from the dead more than once. And at one point, I think it's in the Houston Finch run, where Marc is saying, I'm not you, and this and that. And Khonshu literally gets out a dictionary and shows him the definition of the word avatar and says, you're not just like me. You are me. You are me on Earth. As I said, Khonshu is not shy about pushing that. Now, on another note, and we addressed this somewhat earlier, Marc is the son of a rabbi, and Marc is, as at least depending on the day, one of the very few Jewish superheroes who, again, depending on the run, is practicing or not. It diverges how much of an observant Jew he is. But you have that Jewish aspect, and now you also have this worship of an Egyptian god that's taken over his personality. And in the 80s and in the one run in the 90s, he was wearing very Egyptian themed attire. He was fighting with an Ankh, I don't know how you pronounce it, very Egyptian themed attire. So you have that play between his Jewish upbringing and this Egyptian worshipped deity. That's something that is, again, I would say unique to the character.
That you're absolutely right. I think not just from, what the spiritual teachings were for that given character, in this case, Judaism. I mean, it also has to do with usually you can't separate most religions without an underlying culture. It doesn't matter what you were raised as. If you were raised Catholic, let's say, if you're raised Jewish, if you're raised, anything. When someone says that, they're usually not saying, they may think they're saying, I practice this religion. That's not what they're saying. They're saying, I have these certain things that I have grown up with that I consider to be important to my identity as a person in society and how I'm supposed to interact with others on a regular basis. that's what becomes incredibly powerful over time. Obviously, people should, if spirituality is important to them, they should explore that for themselves. But from a psychological standpoint, all those other aspects are the ones that end up being involved in what would be a comic storyline. So for someone like Moon Knight, it's more like, okay, you're son of a rabbi. Well, that actually commands a lot of respect. That's not something to be belittled. And depending on how that's parsed out, okay, you're going to have situations where you're expected to be the upholder of a community. Like people are going to look up to you to do everything the right way. You're also going to have, if you have this outside influence of another culture, once again, I'm not saying religion, outside culture. If you want to say that's Khonshu and the Egyptian stuff and all that, so be it. Similar to when people are in mixed relationships of different faiths and different cultures. You're going to have to do this balancing act. Ironically, in a man that we've already established doesn't have much balance to him. It's all split. Once again, not trying to disparage any faiths or spiritualities, but if you've come across this in your life, you know what I'm talking about. You pretty much have to start making some choices, or you're going to have to start finding common ground with these multiple cultures so that you can progress, so that you can actually go forward with your life and make the best decisions possible. Otherwise, you end up in this analysis paralysis, Oh boy, am I supposed to be doing this service on Sunday, or am I supposed to be doing it on Saturday? Well, maybe I should do both, but then I won't have a weekend. Oh boy, and how do I apologize just for getting to the nitty gritty of like how someone would handle the basics of that type of circumstance. But at least in a comic, it's more like, oh boy, I have whole group of people that are supposed to be looking up to me, and I know that there's the one true God, and yet this other thing has just saved me completely. How do I serve two masters? That actually can lead to someone finding that the reality doesn't work the way they want to, and therefore they're going to find ways to just put them to the side and create their own reality, or one of my favorite phrases that I heard from Mythbusters, I apologize, I reject your reality and substitute my own.
Yeah. Now, getting back to the aspect of his father being a rabbi and being the one to be a pillar of the community, that would work, except his father is abusive, or at least in the vast majority of the comic retellings of his youth, his father is abusive, occasionally alcoholic. His mother may or may not have died in childbirth or at a young age. And I know that was something that we addressed a couple weeks ago with Eddie Brock. But his father, not really the nicest guy, even though he's a rabbi. And there's that aspect that you have to take into consideration, where his father is respected by the community, but not within his own home. And he was beating Mark and his brother Randall. That's something to take into consideration.
You just hit on, I think, and I apologize because I think I buried the lead with this, not intentionally. Usually when it comes to dissociation, I'm not just talking about multiple personalities. I'm talking about the idea that the reality that you are living in is too much to handle. You end up in a situation where you have to escape. And sometimes it's a mental escape. And you end up either not remembering what happened, or there's actually a variation on this called fugue, which means you just walk away. And folks, this is something, yes, I have seen. I've actually had the experience of someone from multiple states away. I'm talking geographic states in these United States who ended up in one of our hospitals and did not remember how they got there. And the family was looking for them. And it turns out that this wasn't the first time it had happened. They said, oh, yeah, they definitely had a history of abuse, physical, sexual, all sorts of things. The person didn't remember that either, but it happened in their childhood. And unfortunately, it's how our brains learn to survive. Some people, not everyone, but, it's incredibly common. You're almost always going to find trauma when it comes to dissociation as a whole. Same applies to a dissociative identity disorder. So the fact that you pointed that out is incredible. And then you add the fact that you already mentioned, you said it very well. If you're going to say that the person is one of the pillars of society that uses that sense of strength and power to dominate in a negative way his own family, then you're asking for the person to do one thing or another. You're asking them either to fight directly, or in this case, the little kid, they're going to fight indirectly because they can't do anything else. Of course, once again, that dynamic changes as the person gets older, because now, in this case, powered up. Oh, Moon Knight can fight directly.
Well, now that's a perfect segue to the next thing. You said powered up. When he initially gets resurrected by Khonshu, he has those lunar-based powers. He gets stronger as the moon gets brighter. Then Khonshu takes them away. That's something that we don't often see in superheroes. We have a number of superheroes that have obviously different superpowers, and there are also those characters that are not superpowered. Batman comes to mind. It's not often that we see a character who had the powers and then loses them. And Moon Knight, I should say, seems to prefer operating without them. At one point, he's battling someone and they said, "Didn't you have powers? Don't you have powers?" And he said, "I had them. They make you sloppy." So he kind of almost views having powers as a negative thing. That's something that I think plays into, again, all of his negative mindset, because his God, the one who resurrected him, gave him these powers and then said, "Nah, you don't need them," or "I'm just not going to let you have them anymore," and then took them away.
Well, that's an excellent point. I think it goes back to, and believe it or not, I'm going to draw a more mainstream reference, because if Marvel can do it with Moon Knight, then certainly I can. When the Avengers, are really starting to get together in the movies, you have periods of time where good old Steve is basically daring Tony Stark, saying, put on the suit. But the reason he's doing that is, he's like, I want to battle with you, but I want to battle with you with what you need, your crutch. It's an insult, pretty much. Now, naturally, because of the narcissism, he takes it a completely different direction. But the point remains, in this case, Moon Knight was basically saying, not just whether or not I own you, it's this is all you're good for. And that sense of self-worth becomes a big issue. But in this case, I'm impressed that they went this direction and rebuilt the character as someone that feels like they can stand on their own 2 feet by themselves. It's basically showing that it's possible to build self-esteem regardless of the circumstance. To take it a little away from just purely a psychiatric standpoint, that's something that you commonly see philosophically in Stoicism. If anybody wants to look that up, because I think it's a very good way to build resilience in life. The point being that there are so many things that are out of your control. When they're going good, great, celebrate them, enjoy it while it lasts, because it's not going to last. It's going to end at some point, and you're going to have some sort of barrier, something's going to go wrong, whatever that is. And the point is, as long as you know that you are able to rely upon yourself to figure something out while things are going wrong, you'll be fine. If you think, though, that the only time things are going to work out is when you have everything exactly perfect and just so, and everything has to be exactly the way that something beyond you has designed it, then you're going to lose that resilience. You're going to end up incredibly fragile. And that's not something that society should foster. That's not something that parents should foster. That's not something that your social circle or your familial circle should foster. We need to foster resilience amongst one another. So for someone like him, until you mentioned it, well, I could say that basically about all of Moon Knight. Until you mentioned it, I really didn't know that about the character, but now that I know it, I certainly appreciate it.
Another thing that is noted is his supporting cast. As I said, you've got Marlene, Frenchie, Gina, and I forgot about Crawley. I don't know how I made it this long into the episode without mentioning Crawley.
Well, why would you mention Crawley? He's a bum.
He is, but he's also a very loquacious bum and a hilarious supporting character as far as I'm concerned. I believe he was an encyclopedia salesman at one point, and then he lost everything, and he became sort of a homeless vagrant and an alcoholic who just relies upon, again, Jake's generosity. He deals almost primarily with Jake. He does eventually learn about Moon Knight's secret identities and all of the various identities. But in any event, he is one of many of the supporting cast who we see gets pushed away from Moon Knight because he doesn't want them to get hurt. And he needs to keep that distance, because if anybody gets too close, then they're going to end up hurt and or killed. And this is done very, very well at the last issue of the Ellis run, where a cop, I don't remember his name, he decides to take up the new mantle of Midnight and become everything that he feels Moon Knight is lacking, and he wants to be the new Moon Knight. He attacks Moon Knight and he says, I'm better than you, and I want to be loved, etc. And Moon Knight basically beats it out of him and says, I don't want to be loved. I don't need to be loved. That makes me stronger than you. And so that's an issue where he creates this distance between himself and his entire supporting cast. Even amongst Marlene, they have a very on again, off again relationship because of it. Frenchie, again, he's there, he's not. He's there, he's not. He keeps people at a distance because he thinks it makes it safer for them and him. So that's another.
Okay. All right. That can go a couple of different ways. First of all, I think I've mentioned this before. We're social creatures. We need love. On its face, that premise is completely false. That's delusional. That's nonsense.
No man is an island.
Right. Okay. That's one way to go with it. But honestly, I'm not going to hammer that home repeatedly. That's not really the point of that. I think there is a potential for a positive out of that. Namely, there's a difference between I need someone to love me and I am unworthy of being loved. Okay. In other words, I don't think he is avoiding the idea of having relationships. He's avoiding the idea that people are going to get hurt. That's well established. When people are around him and he's able to enjoy their time, attention, and love, okay, it's good. But if no one is around, and as you said, there was a story arc that basically left him broken. Like he didn't have anyone except for, I think you said
his butler and maid.
Yeah. I mean, basically, in theory, it could have been, woe is me. No one loves me. Therefore, I'm not worthy of being loved. It doesn't go that route in the long run. It's more like, well, just because no one is there for me right now, that doesn't mean I'm unlovable. As a matter of fact, as a human being, I know I'm lovable. So at some point, and sometimes just that idea of I'm in this with everybody. And once again, I go back to that stoicism a little bit. Whatever is going on around me and whatever is happening, I'm going to be able to find a way to make this work. I may not even know how, but it will. At some point, it will. And he can't control the people around him also. So in other words, it's actually a pretty powerful thing for him to do, to basically say, look, everyone else, do what you want. Okay, do what you need to. If there's some other things going on, fine. At some point, our paths will cross again. When our paths cross, hopefully it's for the best. But they're going to diverge again. Now, I'll admit, especially with the dissociation, that's a huge problem because he may not know how to maintain health with distance. But I'm saying it has the opportunity to be healthy. Usually I end up going into how terrible all these things are, but I'm going to put a positive spin on this because there's just so much that I could. The same way Anthony could talk about Moon Knight forever, I could probably talk about the problems with dissociation forever. So I'm trying to keep it as short as possible. And I'm trying to point out that there are things you can work on a positive level, even though we haven't actually gone into treatment yet. I'm trying to plant those seeds so that we can move things along a little bit.
So moving forward now into the treatment, I think we've done a exhaustive job, and I don't even know if it's necessarily exhaustive, but it's exhausting, of looking at the various issues that Moon Knight has. How the hell do you treat him in universe? And mind you, he's been in therapy. It was a big part of the Ellis run. In fact, his therapist ended up being compromised by one of the villains who was trying to mess with him because she was trying to direct him to kill a warlord from her country. This is after Warren Ellis left the book. This is the Brian Wood run on the book. But he's been to therapy. So how do you take a crack at it, seeing where, and I don't mean any offense, where others have failed?
Wow. Yeah, this is interesting because I can't even use the excuse I used with Eddie Brock and Venom and the symbiote or anything. I can't say I want to get them separated. In theory, these are separate personalities, basically. Now, here's the thing. There is no rules in terms of what these personalities know about each other. Like, that's not even in the DSM. So that's not a criteria per se. I would have to do as much background as I could with each one of them, because often I'm not trying to disparage Sybil, if anybody gets that reference. But the point being, I don't know who's talking to who. I don't know what each personality knows about the other. I don't know what triggers the dissociation itself. I don't know what's going to trigger specific personalities from coming out. So without any of that base, my goodness, I'm basically going in blind, and I have to treat that as its own patient. So if let's say Jake is coming in, all right, fine. What's he going to be dealing with? He's probably dealing with a lot of societal ills. Like, these are the things that I see wrong with a lot of overarching, be it socioeconomic problems or just the basics of survival in life that he sees people having to deal with, and how he wants to just fix it all basically with brute force. Okay, well, that's not going to work in the long run. That's going to tire you out. You need to find other outlets. You need to find positive outlets for your physical energy, if that's the problem. If we're talking about the social elite, with Steven, I mean, okay, Steven, I get that you're worried about how your tax shelter is doing, but I'm actually trying to ground him in reality. Like, are you aware of what's going on around you with the people that are suffering? I got the feeling in these podcasts, we're going to get a lot of these millionaires with problems, but basically just saying, like, okay, can you get back to kind of more of the common man thing? And even if it's not common man, your own personal relationships, if that's what's interesting to him. If we're talking about Marc Spector, if he ever comes up, well, that may very well be a blank slate, like a true blank slate. In which case, we're starting right from the beginning of, oh, wow, okay, who are you as a human being? I don't even know. Do you know? And just going from the basics. If we're dealing with Moon Knight as Moon Knight, oh, boy. I'll be honest, I'm kind of stumped on that one. Are we talking the powered up Moon Knight? Are we talking the depowered Moon Knight? Because seriously, are we talking about spiritual stuff or not? Getting the basics, the basic groundwork is going to be the biggest issue. There's something else that I probably would look at, and that's seeing if I could exhaust all of them. If we're talking in universe, I want to see exactly how long these people can last from point to point. In other words, you mentioned it earlier, like, does this guy sleep? Is there a way that we can actually just kind of exhaust them so we get down to, when they're at their lowest points? There was a reconciliation that was already done. I want to know how that happened. And I don't think I'm going to get it by, ironically, building up the other personalities. I think I'm going to get it from them being exhausted. I think I would try that, actually. I would have them just give me every frustration, every detail. Just throw it. Like, just go ahead, lay it on me until they can't take it anymore. Because I think at that point it would be, all right, we got a round table, people. And even if they don't know it, whichever personality is like, look, I got the list. I got everything on you, and I got everything on everybody else. So you need to tell me what you think about these others, because without this, I can't help you. And then from there, we're actually having almost like a chamber of commerce where it's like trying to reintegrate this stuff.
Well, it's funny you mentioned the roundtable, because one of the aspects that I used in the screenplay was within Mark's own mind. And this was done, I thought, I sort of cribbed this from the United States of Tara, which was a very well done show about a woman with multiple personalities, Toni Collette. I think she won an Emmy for it. Within Mark's head, there existed a table, and it was in a room, and all of the personalities sat at the table, and whoever was seated at the head of the table was, quote unquote, in control. At various stages of the film, you see Moon Knight, Steven, and Jake in control, depending on what he's doing. And there's a locked room off to the side. And one of the characters, I think Steven was the last addition, at least in my version. It was Moon Knight, and then he made up the Jake personality, and then he made up the Steven personality. And when Steven enters and he says, "What's in that room?" and Jake says, "That's where the boss is," he don't come out. There's a scene late in the film, again, this is my version, where all the characters are struggling and Moon Knight is just sort of losing, and no one's at the head of the table, and the door bursts open and it's Mark. And Mark comes out of the room, sits at the head of the table, and that's when things get real, because Mark was the one that was locked away because he, quote unquote, died in the desert until such time as he was needed to come back and take down Bushman, who was naturally the villain of the story.
Mm-hmm. Boy.
So to your point about who's at the table, that just sort of brought that to mind. So now, how do you treat, I guess, a real person with these various issues? Because as you've said, there's no such real thing as dissociative identity disorder.
Well, I'll say this. I haven't seen it, and I'm not aware of any colleagues that I've been working with that have seen it. So I can't say it doesn't exist. That's not fair. Like I said, it is in the manual, so I have to treat it, as seriously as I can.
Okay, but how do you treat someone like Moon Knight or Marc Spector, whatever identity you want to go with, as close as you can make an analog to real life? Right.
With most dissociations, a lot of it has to do with the real basics of, well, first of all, I usually advocate that the person be in a safe space. I think I've mentioned that countless times. But this is going to be a combination therapy. Usually it does involve medication, depending on what the severity of the baseline symptoms are for anxiety or for depression. Honestly, usually at higher doses than what you would give for just a mild depression, as we call it, or a major depression even. There are types of therapies that help people deal with, for example, it's common in post-traumatic stress disorder, but it is being studied more with dissociation, which is, I'm just going to use the colloquial rather than the full term for EMDR, but it's basically a rapid eye movement therapy. It's purely a physiological phenomenon where you become exposed to certain stimuli. You move your eyes back and forth in a certain pattern, and you get feedback using the therapist as your guide. It's shown promising results. It's the type of thing, though, for example, if it's a matter of a person not remembering a single thing, as a different person, or they've moved or they've completely changed their lives, then, that's when hospitalization comes into play, because you just got to figure out the basics. It's like I said, it's more a matter of, okay, what was their life like? You usually try and get them involved with a one-on-one therapist as well as group therapy if they can tolerate it, because many times people, because of the trauma that they've experienced, they may not do as well in groups. It's something that, depending on the severity, you even look, I'll be honest, you do look at some of the more intensive physiological therapies. By that, I mean, you can look at electroconvulsive therapy, although that's not a true, not considered a first line indication for it. May go to antipsychotic medication for it if necessary. You tell the person that for the most part, substances, meaning alcohol, illicit drugs, things like that, are off the table. They should be completely abstinent if possible, because it opens up too many cans of worms. It's dicey. I'm not going to lie to you. It's dicey. I can't say that I have one set path that this person would need to be treated. And actually the literature kind of bears it out, because so few people have actually had these cases. I think the number one thing I would say is just making sure that the person has a single point of contact, consistent point of contact. I'm not talking about with their personalities. I'm talking about with the therapist, so it doesn't matter. I don't have that ego. I don't care if it's a psychiatrist. I don't care if it's a psychologist. I don't care if it's a licensed personal counselor. I don't care if it's a social worker, whoever it is. They need one consistent point of contact throughout treatment, because that's usually how they'll help maintain their sense of normalcy, sense of stability.
So I guess this is going to be an interesting one then. What happens when Moon Knight gets on Dr. Issues' couch?
Okay, I'm going to be honest. I'm freaking out here a little bit. Who am I talking to right now?
Mark.
Hi, Mark. How you doing? I'm Dr. Issues.
Hi, Doc.
Hi. Okay, so what brings you here today?
Well, let's see. Where do you want to start? Dad was an alcoholic dick who beat me and my brother senseless. I was resurrected by an Egyptian god. I had powers and I lost them. I saved the world a number of times, and I'm not the only person residing inside my head. So you got a lot to work from. Where do you want to start?
Okay. Wow. So let's start with Dad. Okay. You made it clear he wasn't the best father to you.
No.
Okay. You don't have
He was a rabbi. So you'd think me and my brother getting smacked around would have an impact on the community. No, they loved him.
Oh, wow. Okay. So loved on the outside, and I guess didn't return that love inside the home, right?
Nope.
Okay. Oh, boy. I'm detecting a lot of anger with that.
You think?
Yeah. Wow. Now, as a child, it must have been difficult to get through the day. How did you manage to do it?
I had a friend. His name was Jake. He was a good guy.
Okay.
He helped me out.
Okay. So Jake is, you say he's a friend. I apologize because I did do some research before this. I understand you actually went to therapy to talk about Jake, right?
Sorry, Doc, do you want to talk to Jake?
Huh?
You want to talk to Jake? I'm here.
Okay. Hi, Jake.
How's it going, Doc?
It's an interesting day. So
what do you want to talk about?
what have you been up to recently?
Driving a cab. Same old, same old. Stop in, say hi to my friend Gina. She got 2 good kids.
Oh, okay. Sounds like a pretty standard day. I know.
Yeah, they're okay. They're good kids. They're going to hopefully grow up to be something.
Okay.
Their mom works hard. She busts a hump.
But what about you? I mean, driving a cab, you must have some interesting experiences.
Oh, Doc, I got stories I could tell you.
Yeah, I'm not really interested in the stories themselves, but I mean, driving a cab, that's very demanding. It could, and high stress, right? How do you usually cope with that stress,
Yeah, I go to the diner. I have a beer here and there. My buddy Crawley, I try to keep him away from the booze. He likes to yap a bit, but he's a good guy.
Oh, okay.
He's a good guy. Got a lot of good friends.
Yeah. All right. Well, you're giving me a lot of good background information on it. What do you know about Mark?
Mark? He's okay. He could be a bit of a rough around the edges sometimes.
Yeah. Okay. So that's how you feel about him. Okay. If you don't mind me asking, I want to know, a bit about you and your relationship to some of the other names that I may have heard. I mean, how do you get along with Steven?
Steven, he's okay. He tips pretty well. He's got the money. So
wait, I'm talking about Steven Grant. He tips well?
I'm sorry. Did you say my name?
I apologize. And you are?
I'm Steven Grant.
Oh, hello, Steven. Yes, I'm Dr. Issues.
Nice to meet you, Doctor.
Yes, nice to meet you. And
what can I do for you?
Well, I guess we could start by you. What have you been doing recently?
Oh, my goodness. What haven't I been doing? Well, I'm involved in a Hollywood production company. We are currently in the process of financing several fabulous pictures. Hopefully, if you find yourself with nothing to do over the course of a weekend, you'll come out and see some of them. My lovely girlfriend Marlene and I, we like to go off to the Hamptons sometimes and just take everything in and just sort of relax and enjoy. We'll fly the helicopter out there. We land it on the private helipad in the back of the property, and it's just a lovely, lovely property.
Wow. Actually, it sounds like you're living a fantastic life there.
Yes, I certainly have no complaints.
Okay. But, since you're in a psychiatrist's office, I do have to ask you, is there anything that's been stressful for you or causing problems lately?
Well, some of the other fellows around upstairs don't seem to get along quite as well with each other as I would like, so I'm trying to bring them together so that they get along more. It facilitates things a little bit easier. I'm a facilitator. It's kind of what I do. It's my thing.
All right, so you're aware of them and you're really trying to bring them together. Okay.
Oh, yes, because if they can get along, it makes my life a million times easier. I have enough stress on my plate dealing with Hollywood. Have you ever dealt with these Hollywood types? Let me tell you, it is not pleasant.
Oh, well, I could imagine. Okay. Well, I'm trying to learn as much as I can with these relationships with these others. I will.
Now, as long as the other fellow doesn't come out, I think we're all going to get along quite well.
Okay. I'll admit I'm doing my best to keep track here. Let me go through my papers. Who's the other fellow?
The one with the cape.
Oh, okay. So I guess you're referring to Moon Knight?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
I really don't want to bring him in here, though. He's a bit of a rough fellow.
Okay.
I don't like when he.
And I can tell there's been a shift. I'm going to take a guess.
You keep it up, there's going to be a shift in your face in about 3 seconds, Doc.
Hello, Mr. Moon Knight. How are you doing?
I'd be doing a hell of a lot better if I wasn't here.
Okay, I realize that you probably want to be doing a lot of other things, so I will try and make it as short as possible for you. Is there something that is causing you problems right now?
Yeah, the other 3 won't shut up.
Okay. Well, we're working on...
They'd stay out of my way and let me do my job, everything would be fine.
Okay, so basically you want to be in charge.
I am in charge. but they don't listen.
Okay, I see. So basically you want them to fall in line.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Is there one in particular that gives you more problems than the other?
Steven. He thinks he's hoity-toity.
Oh.
I can't stand it.
Okay, so you think Steven is hoity-toity while Steven didn't want you to come out and...
He said that?
No, he said that you were very energetic and intense and
I don't believe that's what I said about that fellow, Doctor.
Well, what I mean is that...
What are you trying to say, you pompous ass?
Okay, I'm sorry. Now, which one are you now?
Oh, come on now. Let's not do this again. Let's not get started with this. All right? Because you boys are going to start getting into it, and then I'm the one who has to clean up the blood in the cab on the way home. Oh. And I don't feel like dealing with that anymore.
You're Hero, right? Hero.
Why are we doing this? Why are we even here?
Well,
what's going on?
Well, I would love to help you. And I've had...
You all just need to get out and shut up and leave me alone.
Secure!
Well, Doc, you survived 2 sessions in a row.
Well...
Sorry, that was a little Chicago-y there. I guess the Jake was still in me. At least, I wasn't talking about, the heart attack and the bears.
Oh, my God.
Sorry, had another heart attack there. Little too much Polish sausage there. All right, now I'm done. Listen, we have fun with this.
Yes,
It's what it's about.
No, it's good.
And I'm impressed that we were able to keep this episode roughly the same length as the others.
Good.
Because, like I said, I can go on and on and on.
No, good.
Anything else you want to discuss about the character before we go?
Since I've never had it happen, I'm being honest. I don't know how I exactly would handle that other than, I would try and treat the person appropriately, and no one's laying a hand on me. I'm saying that right now. In real life, you're not getting close to me. It's not happening. And I'm glad that you were able to do such justice to a character like this, because nobody else on the planet would.
Ooh. I should be insulted, but I don't think I am, because I don't think you're that far off. Sad to say. For better or worse. So that's going to about do it for this episode. So next week, we get to talk about Harley Quinn.
Oh, boy.
I'm really not looking forward to having to do the skit, because I don't know how I'm going to do that thing with my voice.
Or we could get a female.
I don't think Tara Strong or God, who the hell played her? Arlene Sorkin.
There we go.
I don't think either of them are available.
No.
And we're not big enough to get them.
No. Don't worry. We'll make it work.
I'll figure it out. I always do. We always do. That was an egotistical thing of me to say. We'll figure it out. Point is, next week, Harley Quinn. So if you have any questions, anything you would like us to discuss about Ms. Quinn and her various issues and her relationship with the Joker, so we can sort of, play back to a couple weeks ago with that episode, please feel free to shoot us an email, capesonthecouch@gmail.com. You can find us on Twitter, on Facebook. You can download this podcast through the Libsyn Network. Our website is capesonthecouch.live. You can also find us on Google Play and SoundCloud, and hopefully iTunes, TuneIn, and Stitcher. By the time this episode airs, we will have been officially approved for delivery. So, Doc, anything else you want to add?
I just wanted to say that it's very interesting to be educated on a character from the ground up, which is what Anthony did, and hopefully he won't have to do that again, because man, oh man, when he gets into these characters, he really, really knows how to just beat you to death with them.
Yeah, well, like I said, for a guy like Moon Knight, and there's not too many that I know as encyclopedically as I do the Lunar Legionnaire, but he is a favorite of mine, and
Lunar Legionnaire, who knows that? For crying out loud! Oh my God, do you ever turn that off?
Would you like me to turn that off?
No, because then we really wouldn't have much to work with.
Thank you. I rest my case. So, for Doc Issues, I'm Anthony Sitko. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next week.
Capes on the Couch podcast is for entertainment purposes only. Dr. Issues is a psychiatrist, but he is not your psychiatrist and does not have knowledge of your individual situation. For any personal mental health concerns, please consult your own healthcare providers. For medical emergencies, please call 911 or the designated number in your area immediately. Remember that you are not alone and help is out there.